Hi and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Today I wanted to talk to you about bringing together the last three tutorials that we've looked at. So in the first tutorial we looked at creating a multi-purpose back much like this, which you can use for a variety of projects, not discluding of course the Heady-esque inspired designs. We also looked at effective coil creation using your gizmo machine. And then last week we looked at creating small components which you can add onto your multi-purpose back, and then you can layer up with your gizmo coil sections a little bit later on. So I'm going to show you with the larger blue and white opals that we created last week, but I also wanted to give you an idea of what it will look like with much smaller gems. So this is a multi-purpose back right here with a couple of amethysts that have been set in slightly different ways. A couple of weeks ago we looked at prong setting. Now you can do an ultra tiny prong set if you want to. That's another way to add gemstones that are perhaps a little bit smaller onto a base which you can then layer up. So there's a couple of little amethysts there and I'll give you a closer look at that in a moment. But what we're looking towards doing is starting to bring everything together from the preceding three tutorials and starting to layer up to create our Heady inspired pendant piece. So if you pop down to the board with me, I've got a couple of examples here. Now these are the component parts that we made last week. And then 3 weeks prior to that were the multi-purpose back or bases, pendant bases, however you prefer. Now I am going to show you a little bit later on how to attach these tiny little components. Now these are made in the exact same way as the large blue opals that we looked at last week, but obviously it's really tricky to show you something that is so small. So what I thought I would do is utilise some 0.4mm gauge wire. I'm just going to cut a short length from the reel now. And I'm going to show you an effective way to draw together the components that you've created. Now obviously if you were making a pendant with much larger pieces, you can still utilise the exact same techniques, but I'm going to show you quite a large component part on a medium-sized pendant base, just purely because it'll be easier for you to see where all the wire goes. So the first thing I'm going to do is assess where I'd like my pieces to sit. So if this was my finished piece, I might actually want them to kind of twin each other at the top. But what I also need to take into account is if I'm going to add some swirls, as I've done with this charoite piece, then I need to leave some space in between those gemstones, which will allow me to layer up with those coils a little bit later on. So you can obviously nestle them up tightly if you wished to, and then you can layer over the top, but what you end up with is competing coils, and if you're going for a symmetrical look then that's not necessarily what you want. So I would definitely build in a little bit of space between each of those cabochons just to make sure that I've got enough access points to add further detailing. One of the joys of doing a Heady-esque design is you can drop in different sized pieces, different gemstones, however you wish to work. So I'm just going to pop one of these out of the way and flip over the piece that we made last week, which was a blue opal. And we had a coil on the rear, and then we had a wire coming all the way around the girdle of the design. So I've got around about 12 inches of your 0.4mm gauge. I will add the different gauge information onto the YouTube video when this is uploaded. I'm going to thread this through really any point that's easy for me to access, and I'm going to take it about half the way through. So now I know that we've got a place to start, and I'm just going to take one of those ends and wrap it a second time. Now the joy of working with the Heady weave like this, and I'll just bring that up here for a second, is that the more layers you add, the stronger and firmer your grip on those gemstones becomes. So whilst I want to create a really secure housing for my gemstones on that multi-purpose back, if it's a tad tenuous, you're not going to overly worry about that, because we're going to layer and layer and layer over that and ensure that we're happy before we ship that out to our clients or before we start wearing it ourselves. So coming back down to the board, I've wrapped twice around a piece of what I'm going to refer to as the component part. I've got a really good grip on that. So I'm just going to draw those two wires that are coming away into a nice straight line, and I'm going to post them through where I think it will be a good access point on that pendant back or pendant base. I'm just going to draw that to sit down, and I think I'm quite happy with how that's sitting. I'm going for an even space around the outside girdle of the gemstone to line up with the outside of my pendant base. Now what I would probably do is use a much heavier piece of coil to go around the edge to make sure that I can't see any of that original pendant base, but that's for a little bit later on. So I'm just going to flip the whole thing over now. I'm going to take one of these wires out of the way, so I'm just going to pop that over to the side and make sure that I'm still happy with how that is positioned, and I'm going to start finding out where the base lines up with pieces on the component. So I can see that if I just post my wire up through here, and what you can do is put a little bit of a hook on the end so that we're going to post up behind the pendant base and get that to pop back out to the rear like so. Not impossible, but slightly tricky. And I'm just going to support that wire as we pull that around. And then I'm going to chase that twice around a section on the pendant base. Again, just aligning that little hook that you've made so that you know that that will come back through to the correct place. And I'm just catching onto the pendant base at this stage, just because I want to have two lovely wraps to give me a good place to start. I'm going to pull that nice and securely, and already we're starting to get a grip on how that gemstone component is going to sit on the base. So I'm now going to try and find a place where I can grab a piece of the component and a piece of the back and wrap them together. So I'm just going to push up through there and then back through the base and then pull that nice and tight like so. And what I'm doing here is I'm literally tying the back to the component, or the component to the back. And I'm going to chase around for a second time around both of those two pieces of separate wire. And we're going to make that into one piece of jewellery. So again, you can put a little hook on the end. It does straighten out and it does get work hardened. We just need to push that inside. And then what you can do if you're struggling is take either some tweezers or the tip of your pliers and just grab that and draw it through. What I'm now going to do is chase over the top of the wire on the base that we've just looked at, pulling that out of the way again, and I'm going to take it back across the centre of my gemstone component, like so. And we're just going to do a little bit of back and forth to make sure that we're going to get a really good grip. Now I've taken that slightly too far through, so I can post that through and then draw it back up where I wanted it to appear. So nice and smoothly like so. Always looking that the component part is sitting exactly how I want it to sit. So I'm going to move a little bit further down the component now, and again I'm looking for where parts of my component match up with parts of my pendant base. So again I'm going to create a hook, and what you might find is that this little hook gets very brittle and you need to trim it away, which again is one of the reasons we work with slightly more wire. Now I hope that you can see what I'm doing here. I've taken that hook and I've wrapped it through both the component and the base again. And I'm going to take the tail and draw that through, making sure that the component sits where I want it to sit. So I'm going to flip that over. Yes, I'm happy with that. Pop it back down. Some people will tape this into position, but I don't particularly like the idea of opal having tape on it. So I'm going to find another position where my component matches up with my pendant base. And I'm going to continue drawing the wire, and it is really very much like sewing a patch to an item of clothing. So I've got a really nice piece of wire underneath, and I'm just going to go around until that feels nice and secure. If you've got a long distance to travel, you can just helix around the pendant base. So what I'm going to do now is flip this over and look at how I can attach this more securely. So if you remember the loops from the pendant base that we made, so I'm wrapping again, and now I'm just coming up next to that loop on the face, and this is why we went to the lengths of putting loops in there. So I've got a lovely long tail of 0.4mm gauge, and I'm going to post that around the loop that we created, pull that nice and tight, reasonably neatly, albeit we'll probably cover this up later, and then flip back over to see where I can next get some good foothold. So I'm going to push the wire now down around the pendant base and chase it through a couple of times until I can get a good access point. So this aligns really nicely. So I'm going to push my wire up through. What I want to achieve is getting between the stone and the girdle wire. So I've just pulled that ever so slightly apart. You can see that the wire is now poking through. It's grabbing hold of that girdle wire as well as a good strong segment from the pendant base that we created. So I'm going to wrap around that twice because that's a really good access point. It's a really strong access point. Push the wire through again. Grab that on the other side, and then I would continue with the other section of wire in much the same way, but what I'm going to do now is show you how secure that is so quickly. So obviously you wouldn't probably want to sell it like this because there is an element of that being able to move around, but as we move through the demonstration we will be covering segments and layering up, and all that layering adds to the strength and the weight of the piece. So that's the basic idea between adding your component to the pendant base that we've created. What I'm going to do now is very, very quickly show you how it would work on a much smaller scale. The reason I've done it in this order is because it's much easier for me to show you with one of these larger opals than it is to dive straight on into showing you with one of these 6 or 8mm faceted amethysts. I will show you briefly how that will work now though. So just going to pop this out of the way, and we're going to have a look at what we're working with. So I've popped 2 on already. This is a miniature prong set, which you can refer back to the Easy Cheats prong. It's very, very similar in its makeup, just much, much smaller. This is very, very simply a square wire, which is a square coil, and I can show you that in a later video, but this is in fact a drilled gemstone, so this is doubly secure. But what I've done is I've created a couple of components in exactly the same way as we worked with those blue opals. So this is exactly the same method, just much, much tinier. And on the back you can see that one's got an open coil, and this one has got the zigzag coil, as I showed you on the blue opal. So you can work with either of those, and what I think we'll do is we'll just have a look and see where that might sit. I think it would probably look quite nice on that side. So I'm just going to chop off a little bit of my excess 0.4 wire, almost called it naughty wire then. And I'm going to do exactly the same process but just on a smaller scale. So I'm going to find an access point to begin with. You can just use the gemstone to help you create that hook on the end. So I've got quite a small piece of wire here. It's around about 4 to 6 inches in length, and it's 0.4mm gauge. So to begin with, I'm going to make sure that I've wrapped around the rear segment of the component. I'm just going to try to very gently pop this up inside that central loop, like so. Again, you can use tweezers or you can use your pliers just to bring that through. So we've got a great place to start already. I'm just going to bring those 2 wires together at the back, find where I'd like it to sit, and draw the component down into position. So I think I'd like to pop it there. It's a bit smudgy, but I'll have opportunity to polish that momentarily. So I'm going to flip the design over now and show you very, very quickly how you would start this design off, or this process rather. So there's something of a gap between my component and the outside of the pendant base. So rather than trying to bring that together and wrap from the top to the top, I'm going to post the tail of the wire through so that my wire is going to do almost a zigzag effect, like a back and forth. And then I'm going to chase twice around that outer margin of the pendant base, once and twice. I'm just going to push the wire all the way through and then flip the design over. So what we can look at now is if that's sitting exactly how we want it to sit, and I'm quite happy with that. And you can see that my fine gauge wire has come inside the outer margin of the pendant base and outside the component. So I'm going to take that tail and I'm going to post it down inside the component and just through to the back. So you can see the wire has come through inside that outer margin. So I'm going to do another little circuit around the outside once and probably a second time, and I'm going to post that through to the back. Pull that through nice and tight, nice and neat, and if you wanted to, although this is likely to be covered, you can draw those together just to get super neat. So from the back I can actually see the loop on the end of my component, so I'm going to take the tip, the end of my 0.4mm gauge, and I'm going to aim it through the pendant base and out through the component loop. Draw the tail all the way through, and then I'm just going to find a way to hook all that together. So there's part of the swirl on the pendant base. I'm going to draw the wire through, and you can see quite easily at this stage that you can bring the wire through for a second pass the exact same route, and then push that wire back through to the back. Now that is probably sufficient to keep it steady until we build up our layers. When you come to the end of a section of wire and you're happy that the component is indeed safe and secure, just finish off, and I'll show you that now, finish off with about 3 or 4 turns around a good strong section of the heavier gauge wire. So if you join me now, what I will do, we've got this little sort of S-bend in the main segment, and I'm going to loop around that 3 times, and that will be a plentiful way to make sure that that is nice and strong. So that's 1 loop around the S-bend, pull the wire through again, 2nd loop, the wire's getting quite short, so I'm just going to push that up for speed, and I'm going to trim away with about 1 millimetre to spare. Pop that in my scrap pot so I don't stand on it, I've got bare feet today, and I'm just going to chase that little end away as much as I can to disappear inside the pendant. So if we have a look at this now, that's obviously the second half of the little small piece of wire we were working with, and you would continue in the opposite direction to connect that together until you get to the loop at the other end. But you can see already, doing the shake test quite vigorously there, that that is already quite safe. So as long as you're bearing in mind, if you want spaces between your component gemstones, leave those spaces, orient the gems how they best show their specific natures. So with a faceted amethyst, I'm looking for that beautiful display of blueberry, raspberry tones, gorgeous, glorious purples, and I want to see the best angles possible. So just you fit your components to the pendant base, make sure they're all tied in nice and neatly. So what we're going to do in the next video is start showing you how to add in all of the coils, gizmos, and any weaving that you want to add in, any other design features that you think you might like, and that will probably be the final video next time around. So for this one, get all your components into position, enjoy the process, and I will see you again very soon. Don't forget to join me over on Facebook, Gemhawks and Gems Gembox, for my regular Monday lives. We've got crystals, metaphysicals, we've got kits, we've got all sorts of fun stuff to show you. And that's at 8 PM British Summer Time, or if you're watching slightly later in the Greenwich Mean Time, 8 PM on a Monday every other week. I'm Gemhawks, thank you so much for continuing to watch. I hope you're enjoying the tutorials. Any requests, please do just drop me a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Take care and bye for now.